Before we start this story, tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now and what time it is in your city. I want to know how far this story will reach. And while you're at it, subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and share it with someone you know who loves a good life story. Please, Grace, don't leave me alone with her. The trembling voice of a 6-year-old girl echoed through the marble hallways of one of Connecticut's most exclusive estates. Lily Harrison clutched tightly to the weathered hand of Grace Thompson, her small wooden walking cane leaning against the wall beside her princess-themed bed. It was a Thursday morning, and golden rays of sunlight filtered through imported silk curtains, creating an almost cruel contrast between the opulence of the surroundings and the fear reflected in the child's hazel eyes. Grace, a 36-year-old woman with auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and wearing a crisp navy blue uniform, knelt beside the child's bed, decorated with fairy tale motifs. Her hands, despite being marked by 3 years of domestic work, touched the girl's face with a tenderness that completely contradicted her official role in the house. "Sweetheart, you know Grace has to work, but I'll always be nearby, okay?" Her voice carried a maternal warmth she had never been able to hide, even knowing that this silent love could someday cost her the job. The Harrison mansion was a true contemporary palace. Italian marble floors extended throughout every room, Waterford crystal chandeliers hung from soaring ceilings, and original artwork adorned walls that cost more than most people would earn in a lifetime. But behind all that architectural beauty, Grace knew every corner where Lily's halting footsteps echoed, every hiding place where the girl took refuge when loneliness pressed against her chest that was too small to carry so much abandonment. 3 years ago, Grace had arrived at this house through a domestic staffing agency. Daniel Harrison, a 42-year-old architect who owned one of the most prestigious firms on the East Coast, had just gone through a devastating divorce. His ex-wife, Catherine, had left without looking back, abandoning not only a 12-year marriage, but also a daughter who, according to her, interfered with her plans for international expansion in fashion consulting. Lily was only 3 years old when she witnessed her mother packing suitcases and whispering on the phone about her new life in London, finally free from responsibilities. The accident that left Lily with an injured left leg had happened 10 months ago. The girl was playing alone in the mansion's garden when she fell from the antique swing that Daniel kept in the backyard as a memento of his own childhood. The injury was complex, requiring surgery and months of physical therapy. Since then, the carved wooden walking cane had become her inseparable companion, along with the fear of being alone for extended periods. Grace knew every detail of that routine of pain and recovery. She was the one who accompanied Lily to physical therapy sessions every Tuesday and Thursday. She was the one who invented fun games to make the exercises less painful. She was the one who, in the early morning hours, responded to the girl's nightmares about falls and abandonment. Daniel, absorbed in the firm that demanded constant travel, had unconsciously delegated all parental care to this housekeeper who, little by little, had become his daughter's safe harbor. But Grace harbored her own secrets. Beneath the simple uniform and humble posture, she hid a story she had never revealed to anyone in that house. Her nursing degree, pediatric specialization, and nearly 9 years of brilliant career were ghosts from a past that a destructive divorce had buried along with her self-esteem. Her ex-husband, also a healthcare professional, had managed through influence and lies to tarnish her professional reputation, forcing her to abandon nursing and accept any job that would keep her financially independent. It was a cruel irony of fate that had placed her to care for a child just when her own life as a pediatric nurse had been destroyed. But Lily knew nothing of this. To her, Grace was simply the person who loved her unconditionally, who knew her favorite stories, her nighttime fears, and who always found a way to transform pain into smiles. That specific morning, Grace was organizing toys in Lily's room when she heard the distinctive sound of high heels echoing through the main foyer. Her heart sank. Victoria Sterling had arrived earlier than expected. At 31, Victoria was everything society considered a successful woman. Tall, blonde, always impeccably dressed in designer clothes, graduated in interior design from a prestigious European university, and owner of a high-end decorating firm in Manhattan's most exclusive district. She and Daniel had met at an architectural expo 5 months ago, and since then, she had become a constant presence in the mansion. "Hello, darling, I'm here!" Victoria's voice resonated through the foyer with theatrical joy that Grace had learned to decipher. It was always like this when Daniel was around. Effusive, caring, interested. But Grace knew the other side of the coin. "Victoria, I wasn't expecting you so early," Daniel's deep voice echoed from the study. Grace could imagine the scene. Him rising from the mahogany desk where he spent hours on the phone resolving firm matters, a genuine smile lighting up his face when he saw his girlfriend. Daniel was an attractive man, with a well-groomed beard and blue eyes that sparkled when he talked about business or about Lily. But Grace noticed he was blind to certain nuances in Victoria's behavior. "I thought I'd stop by before lunch. You know how I cherish this time we spend together." Victoria's response came loaded with a sweetness that made Grace's stomach turn. She knew that tone well. It was the same one she had heard from her ex-husband for months before discovering his betrayals and lies. Lily, who had been playing quietly with her dolls on the bedroom floor, looked up when she heard Victoria's voice. Grace saw the girl's smile instantly fade, replaced by an expression of anxiety that broke her heart. "She's here," Lily whispered, instinctively grabbing her walking cane as if it were a shield. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Don't you like Victoria?" Grace asked softly, though she already knew the answer. She had observed over the past months how Lily would withdraw whenever Victoria appeared, how her spontaneous laughter would transform into tense silences. She doesn't like me, Grace. She looks at me funny when Daddy isn't watching. And she always says that children need to learn to be alone, that I'm too clingy. Lily's voice was almost a whisper, as if she were afraid her words might be heard by the wrong person. Grace felt a familiar pang in her chest. It was the same sensation she had experienced for months when trying to explain to friends and family that her marriage wasn't the fairy tale it appeared to be. Nobody believed. After all, her ex-husband was so polite, so respected, so perfect. Exactly like Victoria was so elegant, so sophisticated, so perfect for Daniel. "Lily, sweetheart, where are you?" Victoria's voice now came from upstairs, closer. Grace noticed how the tone had subtly changed. Still sweet, but with a poorly disguised impatience. "I'm here, Miss Victoria," Lily replied, trying to sound excited, but Grace caught the almost imperceptible tremor in her voice. Victoria appeared in the doorway like an elegant apparition. She wore a Chanel ensemble in pastel tones, a Hermès bag perfectly matching her shoes, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, Princess. How's my favorite little girl?" She bent down to hug Lily, but Grace noticed how the embrace was quick, almost mechanical, and how Victoria immediately pulled away when she saw the walking cane leaning against the wall. "I'm good. Grace was helping me organize my toys." Lily tried to sound enthusiastic, but Grace could sense the effort it required. "That's nice, dear, but you know girls your age should already be learning to organize their own things. Don't you think so, Grace?" Victoria directed an apparently cordial look toward Grace, but there was something icy in her green eyes. "Independent children are happy children, isn't that right?" Grace forced a smile. "Of course, Miss Victoria. Lily is very smart and already helps me quite a bit." She knew every word was weighed and measured in this game of appearances. "Wonderful. By the way, Grace, could you prepare some tea for Daniel and me, that special way he likes so much? We're going to chat in the study about some plans we have." Victoria smiled, but Grace caught the subliminal message: "Disappear and leave us alone." Of course, I'll prepare it right away. Grace stood up, but before leaving, she turned to Lily. Sweetheart, do you want to come down to the kitchen with me? You can help me with the cookies. But before Lily could answer, Victoria intervened. Oh, what a shame, Grace, but Lily is going to stay here with me. We need to talk about some girl-to-girl things, don't we, Princess? She placed her hand on Lily's shoulder with a firmness that made the child shrink slightly. Grace hesitated. Something in her maternal instinct screamed not to leave Lily alone with Victoria, but she had no authority to object. After all, she was just the housekeeper. All right, if you need anything, just call and I'll come running. That won't be necessary. We two are going to have lots of fun, aren't we, Lily? Victoria smiled, but Grace noticed how her fingers pressed imperceptibly into the girl's shoulder. Grace descended the stairs with a heavy heart, carrying the tea tray she had prepared mechanically. While organizing the porcelain cups, her mind worked furiously. There was something deeply wrong in the dynamic between Victoria and Lily, but how could she explain this to Daniel? How could she make a man in love see that the woman he considered perfect might not be who she appeared to be? She was placing cookies on the tray when she heard it. It was almost imperceptible, coming from upstairs. A muffled sob, then another. Grace dropped everything and ran toward the stairs, but stopped abruptly when she heard Victoria's voice, low but clear enough to be understood. Stop crying, Lily. Whiny children are annoying. Your daddy doesn't like whiny children, you know. That's why your mommy left. And if you keep being this clingy and whiny, he'll get tired of you too. Grace's blood froze in her veins. She climbed the stairs silently, each step increasing her indignation and desperation. When she got close to the room, she heard more of the one-sided conversation. Look, Lily, I'm going to be very clear with you. Your daddy and I are going to get married very soon. And when that happens, things are going to change a lot around here. Children need to learn to be alone, not to bother adults. This business of being stuck to Grace also has to stop. She's just an employee, understand? She's not your mother and never will be. Grace felt tears burn her eyes. It was exactly the type of subtle, psychological violence she herself had suffered for years. The kind that leaves no visible marks but destroys a child's self-esteem and emotional security little by little, day after day. I just want my daddy to love me. Lily's voice was a thread of vulnerability that shattered Grace's heart into 1,000 pieces. Of course he loves you, silly, but daddy's love has limits. And if you keep being this difficult child, he'll realize he'd be much happier just with me. Adults like peace, Lily, and a whiny, clingy child doesn't bring peace to anyone. Grace couldn't contain herself any longer. She knocked on the open door and entered the room with the naturalness of someone simply fulfilling their duties. Excuse me, Miss Victoria, I brought the tea for you and Mr. Daniel. Victoria turned with an instant smile, as if a mask had been placed on her face in a matter of seconds. Oh, Grace, how efficient. We were here having a very productive conversation, weren't we, Lily? Lily was sitting on the bed, her eyes red, but without tears. She looked at Grace with an expression that mixed relief and fear. Grace approached and placed the tray on the nightstand, taking the opportunity to whisper very softly in the girl's ear. Everything's going to be okay, sweetheart. Grace is here. Grace, could you take the tea to the study? Lily and I will come down in a few minutes. We still have some things to discuss. Victoria maintained her smile, but her eyes sent a clear message. Get out of here now. As Grace descended again with the tray, her mind boiled. She needed to find a way to protect Lily, but how? If she told Daniel what she had heard, it would be her word against Victoria's. And who would a man in love believe? The sophisticated, successful girlfriend or the simple housekeeper? She entered Daniel's study, an imposing environment with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a mahogany desk that seemed to have been carved by Renaissance artisans, and large windows offering a panoramic view of the Connecticut countryside. Daniel was on the phone, gesticulating animatedly while discussing some important project. Grace, thank you for the tea. You always know exactly how I like it. Daniel smiled at her with the genuine gratitude he always showed. It was impossible not to like him. Daniel was a fundamentally good man, a dedicated father who was simply blind to what was happening right under his nose. "You're welcome, Mr. Daniel. May I ask a question?" Grace hesitated, knowing she was treading on dangerous ground. "Of course, Grace. You know you can talk to me about anything. It's about Lily. I've noticed she's been a bit sad lately, especially when she stopped searching for the right words." "When what, Grace?" Daniel frowned, concerned. "When there are a lot of people in the house. Maybe she's still adjusting to changes in routine." Grace chose her words carefully, trying not to sound like she was directly criticizing Victoria. Daniel sighed. "I know it's been a time of transition for her. The divorce, the accident, and now, well, Victoria and I are seriously thinking about getting married. Maybe Lily is sensing that and getting insecure." Grace felt her stomach sink. "Marriage? Soon? Probably by the end of the year. Victoria is an incredible woman, Grace. She has experience with children. She worked as a volunteer at several children's charities in Europe. She's going to be a wonderful mother to Lily. Exactly what my daughter needs. A strong, structured, maternal figure." At that moment, Victoria's laughter echoed through the hallway, followed by Lily's forced, cheerful voice. They were coming downstairs. Grace knew she had only a few seconds before the opportunity for a private conversation with Daniel would be lost. "Mr. Daniel, I just think maybe it would be good for you to spend more time alone with Lily. Talk to her about what she's feeling. Sometimes little children get confused with changes and don't know how to express themselves." Grace spoke quickly, knowing she was risking her job but unable to remain silent. "You're right, Grace. I'll try to organize my schedule to have more time with her, maybe a weekend, just the two of us." Daniel smiled, and Grace saw that her words had touched his paternal heart. "Hi, my love. Lily and I had a wonderful conversation." Victoria entered the study radiantly, with Lily by her side. The girl was trying to smile, but Grace could see the effort it represented. "That's great. What did you two talk about?" Daniel stood up to hug both Victoria and Lily. "About responsibilities and independence. Lily told me she's already feeling like a big girl, didn't you, Princess? She said she wants to start doing more things alone, without needing so much assistance." Victoria cast a meaningful look toward Grace. Lily nodded mechanically, but Grace saw her little hands tremble slightly. "Yes, Daddy. I want to be more independent." "My daughter is growing up." Daniel kissed the top of Lily's head with genuine pride, completely oblivious to the subtext of the situation. Grace watched the scene with a broken heart. She saw how Lily forced a smile to please her father, how Victoria manipulated every word to create a narrative that favored her, and how Daniel, in his good faith, accepted everything at face value. "Grace, could you take Lily to play in the garden? Victoria and I have some details to work out about the engagement party." Daniel smiled, and Grace felt the world spin around her. Engagement party. The relationship was moving faster than she had imagined. And Lily. Poor Lily would be forced to smile and pretend happiness while witnessing the approach of a stepmother who had already shown her true intentions. "Of course, Mr. Daniel. Come on, Lily. How about we play secret garden?" Grace extended her hand to the girl, who grabbed it like a lifeline. As they left the study, Grace heard Victoria comment casually, "Daniel, don't you think Lily is becoming too dependent on Grace? Maybe it would be good to think about hiring someone more suitable for a developing child's needs, someone with a background in child psychology, you know." Grace froze. It was the beginning of the end. Victoria wasn't just psychologically mistreating Lily. She was planning to remove the only person the child trusted. And the worst part was that she was doing it so subtly, so well articulated, that Daniel would probably see it as a sensible suggestion from a concerned future wife about her stepdaughter's education. In the garden, Lily sat on her favorite swing, the one Daniel had modified so she could play even with her walking cane. Grace pushed gently, watching how the afternoon breeze moved the girl's brown hair. "Grace, Lily spoke softly without looking back. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Miss Victoria said that when she marries Daddy, you'll have to leave. Is that true?" The question came loaded with so much fear that Grace had to hold back from crying right there. Grace stopped the swing and knelt in front of Lily, holding her little hands in hers. "Lily, listen carefully to what Grace is going to tell you. No matter what happens, I will always be here for you. Things might change, but the love I feel for you will never change. Do you understand?" "But what if she doesn't let you stay? What if she convinces Daddy that I don't need you anymore?" Lily's eyes filled with tears. She was bravely trying to hold back. Grace felt something break inside her chest. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that the adult world isn't always fair? How do you prepare a girl already so wounded by maternal abandonment for the possibility of losing another mother figure? "Lily, there's something I've never told you." Grace hesitated, knowing she was about to reveal a secret she had kept for 3 years. Before coming to work here, Grace was a nurse, a children's nurse like you. Lily's eyes widened. "Really? Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because sometimes in life things get complicated and we have to start over. But do you know why I'm telling you this now?" Grace wiped away a tear that had escaped from Lily's eye. "Because children's nurses make a promise. We promise to always protect children, no matter what happens. And that promise lasts forever, Lily. Forever." Lily smiled for the first time that afternoon, a genuine smile that lit up her little face. "So, you'll always protect me?" "Always, sweetheart, always." But as the hours passed that afternoon and Grace saw through the window Daniel and Victoria animatedly planning their engagement party, she knew that keeping that promise would be the greatest challenge of her life. Victoria wasn't simply a gold digger or superficial woman. She was calculating, manipulative, and had identified Lily as an obstacle to her plans. And Grace, with her nursing secrets and her heart broken by life's injustices, was the only person standing between Lily and a future that promised to be much darker than that innocent child could imagine. That night, after Lily finally fell asleep after 3 stories and 2 lullabies, Grace sat in her small chair beside the bed and watched the child's peaceful breathing. The carved wooden walking cane was carefully propped beside the bed, a constant reminder of how life can change in seconds. She didn't know yet, but soon she would discover that Lily's accident had been much more than a simple fall from a swing. And when the truth came to light, everything she believed about Victoria Sterling would prove to be just the tip of a much more sinister iceberg. But what no one could imagine was that Grace Thompson, the humble housekeeper, carried in her weathered hands not only the medical knowledge that had once saved lives, but also the type of maternal courage that would be capable of moving mountains to protect an innocent child, even if it cost everything she had rebuilt in 3 years of silence and new beginnings. The weeks following that revealing afternoon brought a subtle but noticeable change in the atmosphere of the Harrison mansion. It was as if an invisible cloud had settled over the house, heavy with unspoken tensions and glances that communicated more than any words ever could. Grace felt the weight of that change in every fiber of her being, especially when she watched Lily desperately trying to adapt to the new expectations that Victoria had planted in her young mind. The child, who used to move through the hallways with her wooden walking cane as if it were a natural extension of her body, now walked slowly, always looking around as if expecting to be scolded for making noise. Her spontaneous laughter had become rare, replaced by forced smiles that tore at Grace's heart. It was too painful to witness a 6-year-old losing her essence out of fear of not being loved. "Grace, could you come here for a moment?" Daniel's voice echoed from the main foyer on a Monday morning. Grace was on the 2nd floor, helping Lily get dressed for another physical therapy session when she heard the call. There was something different in his tone, a formality that hadn't existed before. "Of course, Mr. Daniel. I'll be right down." Grace finished adjusting Lily's sandal and kissed her forehead. Sweetheart, stay here playing and Grace will be right back, okay? When she reached the foyer, Grace found Daniel standing beside Victoria, both wearing serious expressions that made her stomach churn. Victoria looked impeccable as always, wearing a beige linen ensemble that probably cost more than Grace's annual salary, and she held a brown leather portfolio between her hands. "Grace, please sit down." Daniel pointed to one of the armchairs in the living room. His voice was gentle, but there was a hesitation she couldn't decipher. Grace sat on the edge of the armchair, her hands automatically smoothing her uniform. Did something happen? Victoria stepped forward, opening the portfolio with precise movements. "Grace, we've been talking extensively about Lily's future, and Daniel and I have come to some important conclusions." Bien, she removed several papers from the portfolio, all organized with the efficiency of someone accustomed to corporate presentations. "Victoria did some very interesting research on child development," Daniel added, looking at his girlfriend with admiration. "She discovered some things that made me rethink how we're raising Lily." Grace felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of things?" Victoria smiled, but there was something cold in that smile. "Well, Grace, you certainly do admirable work here. The house is always spotless, and it's evident that Lily is very fond of you. But," she made a theatrical pause, leafing through the papers, "children who have been through trauma, like Lily experienced with the divorce and accident, need very specific structure to develop healthily." "Trauma?" Grace repeated the word, confused. "Excuse me, but Lily has been recovering very well from the accident." "She's doing her physical therapy correctly and emotionally." "Oh yes, physically she's recovering well," Victoria interrupted, waving her hand as if it were a minor detail. "But what worries me is the excessive emotional dependency she's developed. Children in that situation tend to attach themselves unhealthily to caregiving figures, creating a codependent relationship that can harm their future development." Grace blinked several times, trying to process the words. "Codependency? But she's a 6-year-old who lost her mother and suffered an accident. It's natural for her to need affection and security." "Exactly." Victoria clapped as if Grace had just proven her point. "She needs affection and security, but in a structured way, with clear boundaries. Look at this." She showed a printed page with colorful charts. "This is a study from Harvard University on post-trauma child development. It clearly shows that children who don't learn emotional independence by age 7 are 70% more likely to develop anxiety disorders in adolescence." Daniel leaned forward, examining the papers with interest. "Grace, have you read these studies? They're very convincing." Grace looked at the papers Victoria was waving like irrefutable evidence, and something inside her screamed. Those charts, those percentages, she recognized the language. It was exactly the type of pseudoscience she had seen during years in nursing. Studies taken out of context, statistics manipulated to prove preconceived points. But how could she explain this without revealing her medical background? "Mr. Daniel, with all due respect, Lily doesn't show signs of unhealthy development. She plays, makes friends in physical therapy, has curiosity, asks questions." Grace tried to keep her voice calm, but felt frustration growing. "Of course she does those things when she's with you, Grace. That's exactly the problem." Victoria stood up and began pacing around the room like a lawyer presenting her case. "Lily behaves completely differently when you're not around. She becomes anxious, constantly looks for you, can't concentrate on independent activities. That's not healthy for a child her age." Grace felt her blood boil. "She looks for me because I've been caring for her for 3 years. I know her needs, her fears, her preferences. It's natural for her to feel safe with me. And that's exactly what needs to change." Victoria's voice became firmer, more authoritative. "Lily needs to learn that she's strong enough to function without that emotional crutch." The word crutch hung in the air like a slap. Grace knew it hadn't been chosen by accident. Victoria was deliberately comparing the emotional bond between her and Lily with the physical dependence the child had on her walking cane. It was cruel and calculated. Victoria has experience in this area, Grace, Daniel intervened, trying to soften the tension beginning to form in the air. She worked with children at several charities in Europe, dealt with cases very similar to Lily's. Grace looked at Daniel and saw sincerity in his eyes. He truly believed he was doing what was best for his daughter. That made everything even more painful. "What kind of changes are you thinking of making?" Grace asked, though she already feared the answer. Victoria sat back down and removed more papers from the portfolio. "Well, first, Lily needs to start sleeping alone, without you going to her room during the night. Children who are constantly rescued from their nighttime fears never learn to deal with anxiety independently." Grace felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. But she's had nightmares since the accident. It's normal, and she's only 6 years old. "That's exactly why she needs to learn now," Victoria continued relentlessly. "Second, she needs to start doing more activities alone, without you being around all the time. Maybe some afternoons at other children's houses or extracurricular activities where she's forced to interact without your presence. And third," Daniel joined the explanation, clearly having memorized the main points, "maybe it's time for Lily to have her own room on the first floor, closer to me and, well, to Victoria. This would help her feel more part of the main family unit." Grace looked from Daniel to Victoria and back to Daniel. Each of those changes was carefully planned to distance Lily from her only source of emotional security, but all were presented as benefits for the child's development. "Mr. Daniel, may I speak with you privately?" Grace asked, knowing she was risking everything but unable to remain silent. Victoria immediately stepped forward. "Grace, if you have any concerns, you can speak here. After all, we're going to be a family. We shouldn't have secrets from each other." The word family cut like a razor. Grace understood the message. She wasn't part of this family. She was an employee, and employees didn't have the right to private conversations about family decisions. I just think very sudden changes might frighten Lily. Maybe we could implement these ideas gradually?" Grace attempted one last diplomatic approach. "Grace," Victoria's voice became condescending, "I understand your concern, really. But you need to understand that your role here is to take care of the house, not make decisions about Lily's upbringing. Those are parental responsibilities." The word parental in plural made Grace realize that Victoria already considered herself Lily's mother, despite not having married Daniel yet. And worse, Daniel hadn't corrected the presumption. "Of course," Grace murmured, lowering her eyes. "I apologize if I overstepped any boundaries." "You didn't overstep anything, Grace," Daniel said gently. "We know you care about Lily. But Victoria has studied this extensively, and I trust her judgment." At that moment, Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, slowly descending with her walking cane. "Grace, you disappeared." Her voice had that tone of anxiety that always appeared when she was alone for too long. "I'm here, sweetheart. I was just talking with your daddy." Grace stood up automatically, but Victoria was faster. "Lily, dear, come here." Victoria extended her arms. "We were just talking about you. How about you come sit here with me?" Lily hesitated, looking from Victoria to Grace. Grace gave a small, encouraging nod, trying not to let her anxiety show. Lily approached slowly and sat beside Victoria, but her body remained tense. "Lily, your daddy and I had a really nice idea," Victoria began, putting her arm around the girl's shoulders. "How about you start sleeping in the downstairs room? That beautiful room next to Daddy's study. That way you'll be closer to us." Lily's eyes widened. But I like my room, and Grace will continue taking care of you, of course," Daniel quickly reassured. "You'll just be sleeping in a room closer to Daddy. Don't you want to be close to Daddy?" Lily looked at Grace with an expression that screamed, "Save me!" Grace felt her heart shatter but forced a smile. "It'll be nice, sweetheart. You'll still be the princess of the house." "And there's more," Victoria continued, apparently not noticing Lily's discomfort. "I found a wonderful dance school that has special classes for children who use mobility aids. You'll make new friends, learn new things." What about physical therapy? Lily asked, looking at Grace. Oh, about that, Victoria smiled. I spoke with a very renowned physical therapist, and he said Lily doesn't need individual therapy anymore. Dance will be better for her development. More social. Grace almost choked. But Dr. Mitchell said she still needs at least 2 more months of physical therapy. Dr. Mitchell is an excellent professional, Victoria agreed condescendingly, but he's traditional. The physical therapist I consulted uses more modern, more holistic methods. Grace knew she was losing the battle. Every medical argument she could present would be countered by some specialist Victoria had consulted. And she couldn't reveal her medical background without explaining why she had lied for 3 years. Can I continue taking Lily to her appointments? Grace asked, trying to maintain at least some control over the situation. Oh, about that. Victoria exchanged a glance with Daniel. We thought it would be better if I started accompanying Lily to these activities. To build a stronger bond, you know? Preparing for when we get married. Lily visibly shrank upon hearing this. Grace saw the reaction and was certain Victoria saw it too, but the woman chose to ignore it. When are you getting married? Lily asked in a very small voice. In December, Princess. Daniel smiled. It's going to be a beautiful celebration, and you're going to be our flower girl. Lily forced a smile, but Grace could see the panic in her eyes. December was only 4 months away. 4 months for Victoria to implement all her changes, completely distance Grace, and establish total control over Lily. That's wonderful, Daddy, Lily murmured. That afternoon, while Lily played quietly in her room, which would soon no longer be her room, Grace watched every movement of the child with a broken heart. Lily was building a castle with her blocks, but her constructions were getting smaller, more contained, as if she herself was shrinking. Grace? Lily looked up. Are you going to stay with me when I change rooms? Grace sat on the floor beside her. Sweetheart, Grace will always be nearby, but you're going to be a brave girl, aren't you? I don't want to be brave, Lily whispered. I want things to stay the way they are. Grace hugged the girl, feeling tears burn her eyes. Sometimes in life, sweetheart, things change even when we don't want them to. But you know what? Love never changes. The love your daddy feels for you, the love Grace feels for you, that never changes. What if Miss Victoria doesn't like me? The question came loaded with so much fear that Grace had to breathe deeply to maintain her composure. Why do you think she doesn't like you? Lily hesitated, looking around as if wanting to make sure no one else was listening. She talks to me differently when Daddy isn't around, and she always stares at my walking cane like I'm broken. Grace felt rage rise in her throat. Lily, listen carefully. You are not broken. You are perfect exactly as you are, and anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve even a minute of your time. But she's going to be my mommy. She's going to be your daddy's wife, Grace corrected gently. That's different from being a mommy. A mommy is someone who cares, who loves without conditions, who knows your fears and your dreams. And you already have several people who love you like that. Lily nodded, but Grace could see that words weren't enough to calm the child's fears. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that not all adults have good intentions? How do you prepare a child already wounded for yet another disappointment? That night, Grace was finishing cleaning the kitchen when she heard footsteps on the stairs. It was Lily, coming down with her walking cane and a teddy bear clutched against her chest. What's wrong, sweetheart? You should be sleeping. I couldn't sleep. I had a nightmare again. Lily approached, and Grace saw that her eyes were red from crying. Grace picked her up, despite Lily already getting too heavy for that, and sat in the kitchen chair, gently rocking the girl. Do you want to tell me about the nightmare? I dreamed that you went away, and I was left alone with Miss Victoria. And in the dream, she took away my walking cane and said I had to learn to walk normally. But I kept falling, and the more I fell, the more she laughed. Lily sobbed against Grace's neck. Grace closed her eyes, feeling the child's pain as if it were her own. It was impossible not to see the similarities between Lily's nightmare and the reality Victoria was constructing around her. "It was just a dream, sweetheart. Grace isn't going anywhere." But even as she said the words, Grace knew she might not be able to keep that promise. It was then that she heard it. Voices coming from Daniel's study. The door was ajar, and she could hear fragments of the conversation. "I agree that Grace is efficient, but Lily needs to learn not to depend so much on her." Victoria's voice. "I know, you're right. It's just that Grace has been like a mother to Lily for the past 3 years. Daniel's voice, hesitant. "Exactly, and that's the problem. Lily needs a real maternal figure, not a temporary substitute. When we get married, I want to have the chance to create a real bond with her, without interference." Grace felt the world spinning. Victoria was suggesting her dismissal. Not directly, not yet, but she was planting the seeds. But Grace knows Lily better than anyone. "Daniel, darling, you need to understand that this isn't healthy. Lily is 6 years old and more attached to the help than to her own father. This needs to change." Grace hugged Lily tighter, feeling tears finally roll down her face. The girl had fallen asleep in her arms, finally finding peace in the warmth of the embrace. But for how much longer could she offer this security? She carried Lily back to her room, tucked her carefully into bed, and covered her with her favorite blanket, the one with butterfly patterns they had chosen together on a shopping afternoon. Grace sat in the small chair beside the bed, watching the peaceful sleep that had finally come to the girl's face. From the room, she could still hear fragments of the conversation downstairs. Victoria had slightly raised her voice, clearly trying to convince Daniel of something important. "I'm not saying fire Grace immediately. I'm saying we need to create a transition plan. Lily needs to learn to trust me, and that will only happen if I have space to be the primary female figure in her life." Grace closed her eyes, feeling the weight of inevitability. No matter how much Lily needed her, no matter how much she loved this child, she was just an employee, and employees could be replaced. But then she looked at Lily, sleeping, at the carved wooden walking cane carefully propped beside the bed, at the drawings the girl had made and stuck on the wall, all depicting a family of 3 people: a tall man, a woman in a blue uniform, and a small girl with a wooden walking cane. Grace Thompson had lost everything once: her career, her dignity, her confidence. But this time was different. This time it wasn't just about her. It was about an innocent child who had already lost too much in life. And Grace had an advantage Victoria didn't know about. She wasn't just a concerned housekeeper. She was a nurse with 9 years of experience, recognizing signs of emotional abuse. And everything she had observed in recent months confirmed her worst suspicions about Victoria Sterling. But what no one could imagine was that very night, while Grace watched over Lily's sleep, Victoria's true plans were about to be revealed in a way no one expected. And when that happened, Grace would discover that everything she thought she knew about Lily's accident was merely the surface of a much darker and more dangerous truth. The early hours of Wednesday brought with them an urgency that Grace could never have anticipated. It was 3:27 in the morning when Lily's screams pierced the silence of the mansion like an emergency siren. Grace bolted from her bed in the small staff quarters on the first floor and raced up the stairs, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from her chest. When she reached Lily's room, she found the child sitting upright in bed, gasping and trembling violently. Her skin was pale and clammy, her eyes dilated with pure terror. But this wasn't an ordinary nightmare. Lily was experiencing what Grace immediately recognized as a severe panic attack. "Lily, sweetheart, look at me!" Grace knelt in front of the bed, gently cupping the girl's face in her hands. "Breathe with me slowly. In 1, 2, 3, out 1, 2, 3. I can't breathe." Lily gasped between sobs, her small hands desperately clutching Grace's pajamas. "Grace, she was here." "Who was here, sweetheart?" Grace kept her voice steady, even as her own adrenaline surged through her veins. Her nursing instincts had taken complete control. "Miss Victoria, she was in my room. She said that..." Lily couldn't finish her sentences, her breathing still erratic. Grace looked around the room. The door was closed. There were no signs that anyone had been there. But she knew Lily well enough to understand that the child wouldn't fabricate something like this. "What did she say, sweetheart? You can tell me." Grace continued the breathing technique, watching as Lily gradually began to calm down. "She said that when she marries Daddy, they're going to send me to boarding school, because girls who don't know how to behave need to learn discipline away from home." Lily began crying again, but her breathing was more controlled. "And she said if I told anyone, nobody would believe me." Grace felt her blood turn to ice. Boarding school? For a 6-year-old recovering from trauma, it was absurd, cruel, and completely unnecessary. But even more disturbing was the implicit threat. "Nobody will believe you." "Lily, listen carefully. That was a very real, very scary nightmare. But it was just a nightmare. Miss Victoria wasn't here." Grace chose her words carefully, not wanting to invalidate the child's feelings while also not wanting to feed paranoia. But it seemed so real." Lily curled up in Grace's arms. "Grace, I don't want to go to boarding school. I want to stay here with you and Daddy." "Nobody is going to send you anywhere, sweetheart. Your daddy would never do that." Grace hugged Lily tighter, but inside, a voice whispered doubts. Daniel was clearly under Victoria's influence. How far could she convince him that extreme decisions were for Lily's own good? It was then that Grace heard footsteps in the hallway. Daniel appeared in the doorway in his robe, hair disheveled. "What happened?" I heard screaming. Lily had a strong nightmare, an anxiety attack. Grace stood up but kept one hand on the girl's shoulder. "It's passing now." Daniel approached the bed, genuine concern etched on his face. "My princess, what kind of nightmare was that?" Lily looked from Grace to her father, and Grace saw the hesitation in her eyes. The child was reliving Victoria's threat. "Nobody will believe you." It was about monsters, Daddy," Lily murmured, lowering her eyes. Grace felt her heart squeeze. Lily was protecting everyone, including herself, by not telling the truth about the dream involving Victoria. A 6-year-old shouldn't have to make that kind of emotional calculation. "How about I stay here until you fall asleep again?" Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, stroking his daughter's hair. Can I sleep in your bed tonight, Daddy? Like we used to?" Lily's question came loaded with vulnerable hope that broke Grace's heart. Daniel hesitated. Grace knew he was remembering Victoria's words about emotional independence and healthy boundaries. "Lily, you're already a big girl. Please, Daddy, just tonight?" Lily's eyes filled with tears again. Grace saw Daniel's internal struggle. The loving father wanted to comfort his daughter, but the man influenced by Victoria hesitated to spoil the child. "Mr. Daniel," Grace intervened softly, "anxiety attacks in children are common after trauma. Sometimes they need a little extra security before they can process everything on their own." Daniel looked at Grace, and she saw gratitude in his eyes. "Of course, Princess. Come on, let's go to Daddy's room." As Daniel carried Lily downstairs, Grace gathered the child's favorite teddy bear and blanket. When she reached the master bedroom, she found father and daughter already settled in the king-size bed, Lily finally relaxing in Daniel's arms. "Grace, thank you for taking care of her, as always." Daniel smiled, and Grace saw in his smile the man she respected and admired. "It's my job, Mr. Daniel, and my pleasure." Grace tucked the blanket around Lily. "If you need anything, I'm in my room." But as Grace was leaving, Lily's whispered voice stopped her. "Grace, you promised you'd always protect me, remember?" Grace turned, seeing Lily's eyes shining in the bedroom's dim light. "Always, sweetheart, always." The next morning, Grace woke to the unmistakable sound of an argument coming from upstairs. The voices were muffled, but the tension was palpable even through the mansion's thick walls. She went upstairs discreetly, pretending to carry cleaning supplies, and managed to catch fragments of the conversation between Daniel and Victoria. "It's not normal for a 6-year-old to have panic attacks, Daniel. This just confirms what I've been saying about excessive emotional dependency." Victoria's voice was higher than usual, irritated. "Victoria, she's a child who's been through a lot of trauma. It's natural that—" Daniel's voice sounded tired, defensive. "Natural? Daniel, wake up. Lily is emotionally manipulating you. These attacks always happen when she wants attention. Did you notice? Always in the middle of the night. Always dramatic enough to make you come running to comfort her." Grace felt bile rise in her throat. Victoria was accusing a 6-year-old of emotional manipulation. It was sick, cruel, and completely divorced from the reality of child development. "It's not manipulation, Victoria. She was really frightened." "Of course she was, because Grace feeds these fears, Daniel. Don't you see? Grace has an emotional investment in keeping Lily dependent. If Lily becomes independent, what would Grace's role be here?" Grace had to lean against the wall. Victoria was skillfully turning the situation around, making Grace's genuine love for Lily seem like some kind of calculated strategy to maintain employment. "Grace loves Lily. Anyone can see that." "Exactly, and that's the problem. Household staff shouldn't love the children in the house. They should care for them professionally with clear boundaries. Grace has crossed every boundary, Daniel. She's confusing Lily about what her role is in this family." Grace closed her eyes, feeling tears of frustration burn. Every word from Victoria was like a blade, carefully cutting the bonds between her and Lily, between her and Daniel, turning love into something suspicious and inappropriate. I need to think about this," came Daniel's hesitant voice. "There's not much to think about, darling. Either you make a decision now, or Lily will grow up thinking emotional manipulation is the normal way to get what she wants. Is that what you want for our daughter?" "Our daughter." Grace noticed how Victoria was already referring to Lily as her daughter, even though she wasn't married to Daniel yet. It was a gradual, subtle, but determined appropriation. The rest of the day passed in almost unbearable tension. Lily was withdrawn, clearly sensing the charged atmosphere in the house. She played quietly, avoided asking questions, and jumped slightly whenever she heard approaching footsteps. Grace tried to maintain the normal routine, but she noticed Daniel was watching her differently. There was a new distance in his eyes, as if he was seeing her through the lenses Victoria had carefully placed on his perspective. It was during lunch that the situation exploded. Lily was eating slowly, as she always did when anxious, when she accidentally knocked over a glass of water. It was something completely normal for a child, but Lily froze. Terror stamped on her face as if she had committed a horrible crime. "Sorry, Daddy, sorry, I didn't mean to." Lily began apologizing frantically, tears already forming in her eyes. "It's okay, Princess, it was just an accident." Daniel stood up to get paper towels, but Victoria was faster. "Lily!" Victoria's voice was cold, controlled. "Take a deep breath and clean it up yourself. Girls your age need to take responsibility for their accidents." Grace, who was serving lunch, saw Lily tremble. The girl tried to stand up to get paper towels, but her walking cane slipped on the wet floor. Lily fell, hitting her knee on the marble floor with a sound that made Grace instinctively run to help her. "I'll handle this," Victoria said firmly, blocking Grace's path. "Lily, get up by yourself. You need to learn that falling is part of life." Lily was on the floor, clearly hurt and scared, but trying to get up alone as Victoria had ordered. Grace saw the girl's struggle, the effort not to cry, the fear of disappointing the adults. "Mr. Daniel," Grace couldn't contain herself. She hurt her knee. "Grace!" Victoria's voice became glacial. "Stop! Now!" "Ld." It was at that moment that something inside Grace finally snapped. Seeing Lily on the floor, desperately trying to get up alone while silent tears ran down her face, Grace remembered all the children she had treated throughout her nursing career. Children hurt not just physically, but emotionally by adults who confused discipline with cruelty. "No!" The word came out of Grace's mouth with a firmness that surprised everyone, including herself. "Excuse me?" Victoria turned, shock stamped on her face. "I said no!" Grace walked around Victoria and knelt beside Lily, gently checking the injured knee. "Lily, let Grace see if you really hurt yourself." "Grace!" Victoria's voice was shrill with indignation. "You don't have the authority to—" "I have authority as a decent human being to help an injured child." Grace looked up at Victoria, and for the first time in 3 years, there was no submission in her gaze. "And I have professional authority as a pediatric nurse to assess whether this child needs medical attention." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel stopped in the middle of the kitchen, paper towels in hand, mouth agape. Victoria turned pale as if she had seen a ghost, and Lily looked at Grace with a mixture of admiration and relief. "Nurse?" Daniel's voice came out as a whisper. Grace took a deep breath. The secret she had kept for 3 years had just exploded in the air like a bomb. There was no going back. Yes, Grace Thompson, RN, graduated from Columbia University, pediatric specialization from Johns Hopkins. 9 years of practice before— She hesitated, looking at Lily. "Before certain personal circumstances forced me to start my life over." Victoria quickly recovered from the initial shock. "You lied to us for 3 years? How dare you?" Her voice was loaded with theatrical indignation. "I didn't lie. You never asked about my background." Grace helped Lily stand up, checking that the knee was only scraped. "I was hired to be a housekeeper, and I did my job as a housekeeper, but I won't stand by and watch a child be treated inappropriately." "Inappropriate?" Victoria laughed, but it was a humorless sound. "I was teaching responsibility and independence. You were forcing a 6-year-old child, who is still recovering from physical and emotional trauma, to handle alone a situation that clearly frightened her." Grace stood up, keeping Lily protected behind her. "That's not education. That's emotional neglect." Daniel finally found his voice. "Grace, why didn't you ever tell us?" Grace looked at him, seeing confusion and hurt in his eyes. "Because my ex-husband destroyed my career and reputation. Because I needed a job and you needed someone to care for the house and Lily. Because—" She looked at Lily, who was clinging to her leg. "Because sometimes fate puts us exactly where we need to be." "This is ridiculous," Victoria exploded. "You deceived this family. You lied about who you are. How can we trust you after this? Do you want to talk about lies?" Grace turned to Victoria, 3 years of silent observation finally finding voice. "Do you want me to tell Mr. Daniel about the things you whisper to Lily when he's not around? About how you talk about boarding school to a 6-year-old? About how you treat her walking cane like it's something shameful?" Victoria visibly paled. You have no proof of any of that." "I don't need proof to recognize psychological abuse when I see it." Grace's voice was calm but firm. "I spent 9 years of my life treating children who suffered exactly this type of emotional manipulation." "Daniel!" Victoria turned to him, dramatic tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Are you going to allow a lying employee to accuse me of abuse? Me, who has only tried to help Lily develop healthily?" Daniel looked from Grace to Victoria and back to Grace, clearly trying to process everything that was happening. I need to understand this situation better." It was then that Lily, who had remained silent during the entire discussion, finally found her voice. "Daddy," she said, her voice small but surprisingly clear. "Miss Victoria said you don't really love me. She said that's why Mommy left." The silence that followed was absolute. Daniel turned pale as paper, looking from Lily to Victoria with an expression of total shock. "She— what?" Daniel knelt in front of Lily, gently holding her shoulders. "When did she say that, Princess?" "Many times," Lily whispered, tears finally flowing freely. She always says those things when you're not around. And she said if I told, nobody would believe me. Grace saw the exact moment reality hit Daniel like a high-speed train. His eyes widened, then narrowed, and when he turned to Victoria, there was a controlled fury in his expression that Grace had never seen before. Victoria. His voice was low, dangerous. Did you say those things to my daughter? Victoria looked around like a cornered animal searching for an escape route. Daniel, you need to understand the context. Lily was being difficult. I was trying to... Yes or no? Daniel's voice echoed throughout the house. Grace picked up Lily, protecting her from the confrontation that was about to explode. But for the first time in months, she felt a spark of hope. Finally, Daniel was seeing Victoria for what she really was, and what no one could imagine was that this revelation was just the beginning. Because Grace, with her sharpened medical instincts and experience in recognizing patterns of abuse, was about to discover something about Lily's accident that would change everything they thought they knew about Victoria Sterling. The silence that followed Daniel's thunderous shout seemed to have frozen time within the mansion. Victoria was cornered, her green eyes blazing with a mixture of panic and rage that Grace recognized immediately. It was the same expression she had seen on her ex-husband's face when his lies were finally exposed. The mask of perfection had fallen, and what remained was raw, desperate, and dangerous. Daniel, you're overreacting. I never... Victoria attempted once more, but Daniel cut her off with a firm gesture of his hand. Get out of my house. His voice was controlled, but Grace could see the storm behind his blue eyes. Now. You can't be serious. Because of a confused child and a lying employee, Victoria laughed, but the sound came out hysterical. Daniel, think about what we're building together. Our marriage, our plans. Our plans included making my 6-year-old daughter feel unloved. Daniel took Lily from Grace's arms, embracing her protectively. Included terrorizing a child who already lost her mother? Grace watched the scene with her heart clenched. She saw how Lily remained quiet in her father's arms, but her eyes never left Victoria's face, as if studying every reaction, every word, recording everything in her memory. Victoria changed tactics, tears appearing instantly. Daniel, please. You're letting emotions cloud your judgment. I was trying to prepare Lily for reality. Children need boundaries, discipline. Discipline? Grace's voice cut through the air like a blade. She couldn't contain herself any longer. Miss Victoria, in 9 years of treating children, I learned to recognize the signs of psychological abuse, and everything you did to Lily fits the pattern perfectly. Victoria turned to Grace with pure hatred in her eyes. You have no right to talk about patterns of anything. You're a fraud who deceived this family for 3 years. I may not have told you about my background, Grace responded calmly. But I never lied about who I am. I never pretended to love a child only to hurt her later. I never used my position of authority to plant insecurities in a developing mind. Daniel looked from Grace to Victoria, slowly processing all the information. Grace, do you really believe Victoria was psychologically abusing Lily? Grace took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth, and she knew her next words could change everything. Mr. Daniel, psychological abuse in children rarely leaves visible marks. It manifests through behavioral patterns, isolating the child from support sources, planting doubts about parental love, veiled threats, subtle humiliation, and primarily commanding secrecy about what happens. Lily shifted in her father's arms and whispered, Grace, can I tell about the other things? Grace's heart accelerated. What other things, sweetheart? Lily looked at Victoria, who had visibly paled, then at her father. Daddy, Miss Victoria always said my walking cane was ugly. She said normal children don't need walking canes, and that you were embarrassed by me when we went out together. Daniel closed his eyes, deep pain etched on his face. My princess, I was never embarrassed by you. Your walking cane is part of you, and you are perfect exactly as you are. I know, Daddy. Grace always told me that, but Miss Victoria... Lily hesitated, looking again at Victoria. She said, if I didn't learn to walk without the cane before your wedding, you were going to send me to a place where they teach broken children to be normal. Grace felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. The cruelty of those words was so profound, so calculated to destroy a child's self-esteem that she could barely breathe. That's a lie, Victoria exploded, finally losing all composure. This child is making up stories. Daniel, are you going to believe childhood fantasies? But Daniel was no longer looking at Victoria. His eyes were fixed on Lily, and Grace could see that he finally understood the extent of what had been happening right under his nose. Lily, he said gently, you kept all of this inside you during all these months. Lily nodded, tears flowing silently. She said if I told, you would get angry with me, and that you would send Grace away because I was a whiny, difficult child. Grace saw Daniel clench his fists, fighting to maintain control in front of his daughter. When he turned to Victoria, there was a coldness in his eyes that made even Grace shudder. Leave my house now and never come back. Daniel, you're making a terrible mistake. Victoria tried one last gambit, but Daniel was already turning away. Grace, he said, still holding Lily, can you stay with her while I escort Miss Sterling to the door? Grace nodded, extending her arms for Lily, but as the child was being transferred from her father's embrace to hers, Lily whispered something that made everyone's blood freeze. Daddy! She also said it was her fault I fell from the swing. The world stopped. Daniel froze mid-movement. Grace felt her stomach plummet. And Victoria turned white as paper, her eyes widening in total panic. What did you say, Princess? Daniel asked with a trembling voice. Lily looked at Victoria, then at her father. Miss Victoria said she pushed the swing when I was playing to teach me that disobedient children get hurt. She said I was lucky I only broke my leg because it could have been much worse. The silence that followed was absolute and terrifying. Grace felt as if she were falling into an abyss. Lily's accident hadn't been an accident. Victoria had deliberately hurt a 6-year-old child. That's not true, Victoria stammered, but her voice came out without strength, without conviction. Daniel turned slowly toward her, and Grace saw something she had never seen before in his eyes, a murderous coldness that made her instinctively step back. You hurt my daughter on purpose. His voice was low, controlled, more dangerous than any scream. No, she's making it up. Children make up stories. Victoria was desperate now, looking around like a wild animal seeking an escape. Grace hugged Lily tighter, but her medical mind was working rapidly. Lily, sweetheart, do you remember anything else about the day you fell? Lily nodded. Miss Victoria was in the garden with me. She said I could use the swing if I wanted, but that brave girl swung really high. When I was swinging hard, she pushed the swing from behind and I went flying. Why didn't you ever tell this before, sweetheart? Grace asked gently. Because afterward at the hospital, she came to my room and said if I told, she would say it was my fault for doing dangerous things, and that you would lose your job for not watching me properly. Lily looked at Grace with eyes full of tears. I didn't want you to leave. Grace felt tears burn her eyes. For 10 months, Lily had carried alone the weight of having been deliberately hurt, protecting both Grace and herself from what she perceived as even worse consequences. Daniel was trembling with rage. You broke my 6-year-old daughter's leg on purpose, and then you threatened her not to tell. Daniel, listen. Victoria tried to approach, but he backed away as if she were poisonous. No. His voice cut through the air. Don't speak, don't come near, don't breathe near my daughter. He picked up the phone. Grace, can you call the police? Police. Victoria paled even more. Daniel, you can't. There's no proof. It's a child's word. My child's word, Daniel said coldly, dialing, and I believe every word she said. Grace watched the scene with a mixture of relief and horror. Finally the truth had come to light. But the price had been 10 months of a child carrying a terrible trauma alone. Lily, Grace said softly, you were very brave to tell the truth. Very brave. Grace isn't going to leave, Lily asked, clutching Grace's uniform. Never, sweetheart. Grace is never leaving. She looked at Daniel, who nodded firmly. Never, he confirmed. Grace is part of our family, and now I understand she was always the real mother you needed. Victoria made one last desperate attempt. Daniel, think about your career, the scandal. I have connections, influence. I can ruin you. Daniel laughed, but it was a humorless sound. Victoria, I built my firm from nothing with honesty and hard work, and you just threatened a child in front of me. You can do whatever you want. I'm going to protect my daughter. The police arrived 30 minutes later. Grace was impressed by the speed and seriousness with which they treated the case. The detective who took charge, Detective Rodriguez, was an experienced man who had dealt with many cases of child abuse. Mr. Harrison, he said after hearing the entire story, we'll need a formal interview with Lily, but it will be conducted by child psychology specialists. And you, Miss Sterling, are under arrest for assault on a minor and making threats. As Victoria was led away in handcuffs, screaming about lawyers and influence, Grace held Lily in her lap, watching the scene with a surreal feeling. In a matter of hours, everything had changed completely. Grace, Daniel approached after the police left. I owe you apologies. More than apologies. I owe you my daughter's life. Grace shook her head. Mr. Daniel, you couldn't have known. I should have seen. I should have listened. I should have trusted you from the beginning. He looked at Lily, who had finally fallen asleep in Grace's arms. Grace, I want to make an official proposal. Grace looked up, curious. I'd like you to return to nursing. Here, caring for Lily and other children. I can finance a clinic, help you rebuild your career. He hesitated. And I would very much like you to continue being part of our family, not as an employee, but as the mother Lily always needed. Grace felt tears roll down her face. Mr. Daniel. Daniel, he corrected with a smile. Just Daniel. Daniel, she tried again. I would love to return to nursing, but even if I were the president, I would still want to take care of Lily, because I love her, not out of obligation, not for work, but because she's my heart's daughter. Daniel smiled, and for the first time in months, Grace saw true peace in his eyes. Our daughter, he corrected gently. 6 months later, the Lily Harrison Pediatric Clinic opened its doors in a modern building in downtown Hartford. The sign at the entrance read, Grace Thompson, RN, Pediatric Trauma Specialization. And in a special room, decorated with drawings of butterflies and rainbows, Lily did her physical therapy daily, no longer with fear or shame, but with pride in her strength and courage. Grace, Lily said one Thursday afternoon, while practicing walking without her cane for a few steps, can I call you Mom now? Grace knelt in front of her, holding her little hands. You always could, sweetheart. I was always your heart's mom. And Daddy? Can he be your heart's dad too? Lily asked, with the adorable innocence of a 7-year-old. Grace looked through the clinic window, where Daniel was in the parking lot, talking on the phone about some construction project. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up and waved, that gentle smile she had learned to love lighting up his face. Maybe, sweetheart, Grace smiled. Maybe. Victoria Sterling was sentenced to 2 years in prison for assault on a minor, plus having to pay compensation and undergo mandatory psychiatric treatment. Her decorating business went bankrupt. Her connections proved non-existent, and she discovered that influence based on lies and manipulation doesn't withstand the test of truth. And Lily? Lily grew up strong, brave, and with absolute certainty that she was loved unconditionally. Her carved wooden walking cane became a symbol not of limitation, but of overcoming. And when, at age 8, she finally managed to walk completely without support, she kept the cane in her room, not as a bad memory, but as a trophy of her own strength. Grace, she said the night she put away the cane for the last time. Thank you for protecting me even when I couldn't protect myself. Grace kissed her forehead, tucking the blankets around the girl who had transformed her life. That's what mothers do, sweetheart. We protect our children, always. And as Lily fell asleep peacefully, knowing herself loved and safe, Grace reflected on life's mysterious ways. Sometimes we lose everything to find what really matters. Sometimes we need to break completely to rebuild ourselves stronger. And sometimes, when we think we're just surviving, we're actually saving someone who desperately needs to be saved. The Harrison mansion was no longer a cold palace full of marble and crystal. It was a home full of laughter, dinner table conversations, bedtime stories, and most importantly, full of true and unconditional love. So tell me, what would you do in Grace's place? Let me know in the comments what city you're watching from and what you thought of this story. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Because sometimes, the most ordinary person in the world carries within them the power to transform entire lives. Sometimes, the angel we were waiting for arrives disguised as a housekeeper, with hands weathered by work and a heart full of love to give. And always remember, dignity has no price, true love has no conditions, and courage has no size. It can come with a nursing degree or in a housekeeper's uniform. It can come with a wooden walking cane or in a child's trembling voice. What matters is that when truth needs to be told, someone has enough courage to tell it. Because at the end of the day, family isn't about blood or last names. Family is about who stays by your side when the whole world seems to be against you. Family is about who loves you not despite your scars, but exactly as you are, walking canes and all. The end.